The dressing room walls seemed to close in around him as the doctor's words echoed through the concrete corridors beneath the stadium. Outside, 35,000 voices rose in unified anticipation, their energy vibrating through the floor, through the walls, through the very bones of the man who had built his legend on never letting them down. But this time was different. This time, Freddie Mercury sat on a metal folding chair, his left leg elevated, a fracture running through his shin like a crack in a foundation that had held steady for 35 years. The accident had happened just hours before show time, a moment of carelessness that would have sidelined any ordinary performer. A misstep backstage, a piece of equipment in the wrong place, the sickening crack that stopped conversation mid-sentence and sent roadies scrambling for help. Now, as the local physician finished his examination, his verdict carried the weight of crushing disappointment. Cancel the show immediately. The fracture was clean but significant, requiring immediate immobilization and rest. Any attempt to perform would risk permanent damage, potentially career-ending complications. The promoter stood in the doorway, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. Months of preparation, hundreds of thousands of dollars in production costs, the reputation of the venue, the logistics of refunding tickets to fans who had traveled from across the continent. Yet even through his financial anxiety, genuine concern showed in his eyes. He had seen performers push through pain before, had witnessed the toll that dedication could exact on the human body. This was different. This was a medical emergency masquerading as a career decision. Freddie listened to their arguments in silence, his dark eyes moving between the X-ray images and the faces of those who surrounded him. The pain medication they offered sat untouched on the table beside him. His reasoning was simple and uncompromising. Anything that might affect his voice was not an option. The voice was everything, the instrument through which he channeled not just music, but the very essence of who he was. He would endure the physical agony before he would risk compromising the gift that had carried him from a shy boy in Zanzibar to the stages of the world. Through the walls came the sound of the opening act finishing their set, the crowd's energy building toward the moment they had all been waiting for. In venues across South America, Queen had been delivering performances that would become the stuff of legend, each show building on the last, each audience more passionate than the one before. The tour had become more than a series of concerts. It had evolved into a cultural phenomenon, a shared experience that transcended language barriers and united strangers in collective joy. The physician tried once more to explain the risks, his voice taking on the measured cadence of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news. Performing on a fractured leg without proper immobilization could lead to displacement of the bone fragments. The constant movement, the pounding rhythms that drove Queen's music, the physical demands of a full stage performance, all of these factors could transform a manageable injury into something far more serious. Recovery time could stretch from weeks into months, potentially affecting not just this tour, but future commitments. But as the doctor spoke, something fundamental was happening in Freddie's mind, a transformation that those who knew him best had witnessed before. The performer was taking precedence over the patient, the artist overruling the individual. This was not merely about one show or one audience. This was about the sacred contract between performer and fan, the unspoken promise that when someone paid their money and showed up with hope in their hearts, they would receive everything he had to give. The promoter, recognizing the shift in Freddie's demeanor, made one final appeal. The audience would understand, he insisted. A medical emergency was something beyond anyone's control. They could reschedule, perhaps arrange a makeup date once the injury had properly healed. The disappointment would be temporary, but the respect for prioritizing health and safety would be lasting. Insurance would cover the costs. Contracts contained force majeure clauses for exactly these situations. Freddie's response came not in words, but in action. He stood slowly, testing his weight against the fractured leg, his face betraying nothing of the pain that shot through his body like lightning. The decision had been made not through careful deliberation, but through instinct, through a commitment that ran deeper than rational thought. These people had not traveled hundreds of miles to hear excuses or receive refunds. They had come for Queen, for the music that had become the soundtrack to their lives, for the experience that existed nowhere else in the world. The medical team exchanged worried glances, understanding that their patient had moved beyond their influence. Professional ethics demanded that they document their recommendations, that they make clear the risks and consequences. But they also recognized something else in Freddie's bearing. A determination that belonged to someone accustomed to transforming impossibility into reality. This was not reckless bravado, this was calculated courage, the kind that had built careers on the willingness to risk everything for the sake of art. As showtime approached, the practical questions began to surface. How would he navigate the elaborate stage setup that Queen was famous for? How would he manage the costume changes, the choreographed movements, the physical demands of nearly 2 hours of high-energy performance? The stage crew gathered around him, quietly discussing modifications, workarounds, anything that might help him deliver the show while minimizing additional damage to his already compromised leg. But even as these conversations continued around him, Freddie Mercury was already somewhere else, his mind shifting into the space where pain became irrelevant, and the only thing that mattered was the music waiting to be born. In 20 minutes, he would walk onto that stage, and for the next 120 minutes, 35,000 people would receive exactly what they had come for, completely unaware that they were witnessing one of the most remarkable displays of professional dedication in the history of live performance. The air in the makeshift medical tent was thick with tension, antiseptic, and the humid heat of a South American evening. Outside, 60,000 voices created a thunderous symphony of anticipation, chanting Queen's name with a fervor that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. Inside this cramped space behind the stage, a different kind of drama was unfolding, one that would test the very essence of what it meant to be a performer. Freddie Mercury sat on the edge of a folding chair, his leg elevated on a makeshift platform of equipment cases. The fracture in his fibula throbbed with each heartbeat, a steady reminder of the afternoon's mishap during sound check. He had been moving across the stage with his characteristic theatrical flair when a loose cable caught his boot, sending him tumbling into the monitor speakers with a sickening crack that echoed through the empty stadium. The tour doctor, a seasoned professional who had seen every conceivable injury in his years following rock bands across continents, stood before Freddie with a small arsenal of pain medication. Morphine, codeine, a cocktail of powerful analgesics that could transform the excruciating pain into a manageable whisper. His weathered hands held the syringe with practiced steadiness as he explained the options, his voice carrying the authority of medical expertise and genuine concern. This was no ordinary injury for an ordinary performer. The fracture was complete, the bone compromised in a way that made every movement a test of endurance. Walking would be agony. Dancing would be impossible for most mortals. Performing for 2 hours straight would be nothing short of torture. Yet here was Freddie Mercury, studying the medications with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts, his dark eyes calculating not the relief they might bring, but the cost they would exact. The band members gathered in a protective semicircle around their lead singer, their faces etched with worry and uncertainty. Brian May's usually composed demeanor showed cracks of concern as he watched his friend weigh an impossible decision. Roger Taylor paced nervously, his drumsticks clicking against his palm in an anxious rhythm that matched the distant crowd's clapping. John Deacon stood quietly in the corner, his bass guitar leaning against the tent wall, his presence a steady anchor in the swirling chaos of emergency medical consultations and tour management panic. The tour promoters had already begun discussing cancellation procedures. Insurance representatives were being contacted, refund protocols were being activated. The financial implications were staggering, but more importantly, the disappointment of 60,000 fans who had traveled from across the continent to witness Queen's first major South American tour would be devastating. This was more than a concert, it was a cultural moment, a bridge between worlds, a celebration of music that transcended language and geography. Freddie's fingers drummed against the chair's metal frame as the doctor continued his explanation of the medication options. Each drug came with its own profile of effects, its own timeline of relief and recovery. But there was one side effect that appeared consistently across every option presented, one consequence that made Freddie's blood run cold despite the tropical heat surrounding them. Every single painkiller, from the mildest to the most potent, would affect his cognitive function. They would dull his reflexes, cloud his judgment, and most catastrophically, compromise the razor-sharp vocal control that defined his artistry. The voice was everything. It was the instrument through which Freddie channeled not just melody and lyrics, but pure emotional energy. It was a finely tuned mechanism that required complete mental clarity, perfect breath control, and absolute awareness of every subtle vibration in his chest, throat, and head. The medications would wrap his consciousness in cotton wool, muffling not just the pain but the exquisite sensitivity that allowed him to hit notes that seemed to defy human possibility, to control dynamics with surgical precision, to communicate directly with the souls of his audience through sound alone. Brian approached his friend with gentle concern, kneeling beside the chair to meet Freddie's eyes at the same level. Their friendship stretched back to their university days, built on shared musical obsessions and complementary artistic visions. Brian had seen Freddie push through challenges that would have stopped other performers cold, but this was different. This was a test of human endurance that bordered on the impossible. The conversation that followed was conducted in hushed tones, but the intensity was palpable to everyone in the tent. Brian argued for the medications, for the rational choice that would make the performance possible without permanent damage. Roger joined the discussion, his concern evident in every word as he reminded Freddie that one show was not worth risking his long-term health. John, typically the voice of quiet reason, suggested that perhaps discretion was the better part of valor in this instance. But Freddie's response cut through their concerns with characteristic determination. He spoke of the fans who had saved their money for months to buy tickets. He talked about the cultural significance of this tour, of Queen's responsibility as artists to deliver the transcendent experience that rock music promised. He reminded them of the countless times they had overcome seemingly impossible obstacles through sheer will and artistic integrity. As he spoke, his voice grew stronger, more resolute. The pain was still there, sharp and insistent, but it was being channeled into something else, something that transformed physical suffering into artistic fuel. This was the alchemy that separated true performers from mere entertainers, the mysterious process by which limitation became liberation, constraint became creativity. The doctor made one final attempt to convince him, explaining in clinical detail what performing on a fractured leg without pain management would entail. The body's natural response would be to protect the injured limb, creating compensatory tension throughout his entire system. His posture would be affected, his breathing might be compromised, and the risk of further injury was significant. But with each medical warning, Freddie's resolve seemed to strengthen rather than weaken. He made his choice with the quiet certainty that had characterized every major decision in his artistic career. No medications, no chemical barriers between his consciousness and his craft. If he was going to perform, it would be with every faculty intact, every sense sharp, every emotional channel wide open. The pain would simply become part of the performance, another element to master and transform into art. The stadium lights carved through the humid Buenos Aires night like searchlights hunting for secrets. 35,000 voices roared in anticipation, their collective breath creating a mist that hung over the crowd like incense in a cathedral. Behind the stage, in a cramped medical tent that smelled of antiseptic and desperation, Freddie Mercury sat perfectly still as a doctor wrapped his fractured leg in bandages that would have to suffice as both splint and prayer. The physician's words cut through the backstage chaos with clinical precision. Cancel the show, the fracture was fresh, the pain would be unbearable, and performing could cause permanent damage. The tour promoter echoed the sentiment, his face pale with the financial implications, but his concern genuine. 45 minutes until showtime, and their headliner sat with a leg that shouldn't bear weight, let alone command a stage for 2.5 hours. Freddie's response came not in words but in action. He stood, testing his weight against the pain that shot up his leg like liquid fire. His face betrayed nothing of the agony coursing through his body. The doctor offered morphine, a cocktail of painkillers that would make the performance possible, but would cloud his mind and dull the precision his voice demanded. Freddie shook his head with the quiet authority of a man who had made his choice before the offer was extended. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here in South America, where Queen had found some of their most passionate audiences, where the crowds sang their songs back to them with a fervor that transcended language barriers, he faced a moment that would define not just this night, but his understanding of what it meant to be a performer. The pain in his leg was immediate and unforgiving, but the thought of disappointing the thousands who had traveled from across the continent, who had saved money they didn't have to see Queen perform, was a different kind of agony altogether. The 1981 South American tour had already been a revelation. In countries where rock music was still finding its voice, where political tensions made large gatherings complicated affairs, Queen had discovered audiences whose connection to music felt almost spiritual. These weren't just concerts, they were communions. The crowds didn't just listen, they participated with their entire beings, creating a feedback loop of energy that elevated every performance beyond mere entertainment into something approaching transcendence. Now, as roadies made final adjustments to the equipment and the crowd's anticipation reached a fever pitch, Freddie faced a choice that would strip away every safety net, every comfort, every accommodation that might make the next few hours bearable. The pain medication sat unused on the medical table, a small mercy he would deny himself because his voice was sacred, his connection to the audience holy, and nothing could be allowed to interfere with that communion. The backstage area buzzed with nervous energy as band members and crew absorbed the gravity of the situation. Roger Taylor's drumsticks tapped out anxious rhythms against his thigh. Brian May tuned and retuned his guitar with the obsessive focus of a man trying to control the one thing he could in a situation spinning toward chaos. John Deacon stood quietly in the corner, his bass ready, his expression betraying the concern they all felt but couldn't voice. But Freddie had already moved beyond concern into a state of focused determination that those who knew him recognized as dangerous. This was the space he occupied when he decided that the impossible was merely another challenge to be conquered, where pain became fuel rather than obstacle, where the very limitations others saw as insurmountable became the foundation upon which he would build something extraordinary. The crowd's chant began as a murmur and built into a thunderous demand. They wanted Queen, they wanted Freddie, and the night hung in the balance between what was medically advisable and what was artistically necessary. In that tension, in that space between safety and transcendence, Freddie Mercury made the choice that would transform an evening of entertainment into a legend of dedication. The stage manager appeared at the tent entrance, his headset crackling with urgent communications. Time had run out. The crowd wouldn't wait much longer, and every minute of delay risked turning anticipation into frustration. Freddie stood again, this time with finality. He took 3 careful steps, each one a negotiation with gravity and pain, each one a small victory that convinced him the larger victory was possible. His bandmates watched as he walked toward the stage entrance, his gait careful but determined. There was no limping, no visible accommodation to his injury. From the moment he decided to perform, Freddie had begun the transformation from wounded man to immortal performer, drawing on reserves of will that seemed to exist beyond the physical realm. The roar of the crowd grew louder as they sensed movement behind the stage. Lights began to dim in the arena, and the familiar opening chords of the night's first song prepared to cascade over 35,000 people who had no idea they were about to witness something that would be spoken about in whispers and shouts for decades to come. In those final moments before he stepped into the lights, Freddie Mercury stood at the threshold between human limitation and artistic transcendence. His leg throbbed with each heartbeat, a metronome of pain that would count out every second of the next 2.5 hours. But his voice was clear, his spirit unbroken, and his commitment to the people waiting in the darkness absolute. The lights went down, plunging the stadium into anticipatory blackness, and Queen prepared to take the stage. What happened next would become the stuff of legend, a performance that would be dissected and celebrated by music historians, a night when the line between dedication and obsession, between professionalism and madness, would blur into something approaching the divine. The darkness held its breath. 35,000 hearts beat in unison, and Freddie Mercury stepped into the light carrying pain like a secret gift, ready to transform suffering into song, limitation into liberation, and an evening of entertainment into an immortal testament to the power of will over flesh. The stage erupted in light and sound as Queen launched into their opening number. Freddie Mercury emerged from the darkness like a phoenix materializing from shadow, his white costume catching the spotlights and throwing brilliance back into the crowd with theatrical perfection. To the 35,000 people packed into the stadium, he appeared exactly as they expected their rock god to appear. Confident, electric, and completely in command of both the stage and their collective soul. What they couldn't see, what the carefully positioned lighting and strategic choreography concealed, was the careful calculation behind every movement. Each step across the stage was a masterclass in controlled motion, every gesture precisely calibrated to maximize impact while minimizing the weight that his fractured leg would have to bear. The pain shot through him with each stride, but years of performance had taught him to channel physical sensation into emotional expression, and tonight that skill would be tested beyond all previous limits. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. As Freddie's voice soared over the opening chords, 35,000 people became a single organism, pulsing with shared ecstasy. They sang along with every word they knew, their voices creating a wall of sound that seemed to lift the very roof of the stadium. For these fans, many of whom had never seen Queen perform live, this wasn't just a concert, but a pilgrimage, a once-in-a-lifetime communion with musical gods who had traveled from another world to grace their stage. Freddie fed off their energy like a man dying of thirst finally finding water. The crowd's adoration became a kind of painkiller more potent than any medicine the doctor had offered. When 35,000 people sing your songs back to you with religious fervor, when their faces reflect the light of your performance like mirrors catching fire, physical pain becomes just another instrument to be mastered, another element to be woven into the larger symphony of the night. His movements across the stage told a story of careful artistry disguised as spontaneous passion. Where he might normally have bounded from one side of the platform to the other, tonight he moved with the deliberate grace of a dancer, each gesture flowing into the next with liquid precision. The microphone stand became more than a prop, it became a partner supporting him during the moments when the pain threatened to overwhelm his careful control, while appearing to the audience as nothing more than theatrical flourish. Roger Taylor's drums provided the heartbeat that kept Freddie anchored to rhythm when pain might have disrupted his timing. Brian May's guitar work seemed to anticipate moments when Freddie needed musical support, stepping forward in the mix during passages where the vocalist's concentration was fully consumed by the battle between his will and his wounded body. John Deacon's bass lines created a foundation solid enough to support not just the songs, but the entire architecture of deception that allowed this performance to exist. The set list flowed like a river of molten gold, each song chosen and arranged to tell the story of Queen's journey while accommodating the physical limitations that only 4 people in the stadium truly understood. During the quieter numbers, Freddie could position himself at center stage and let his voice carry the weight of the performance. During the anthemic rockers, he could use the crowd's energy to mask the moments when pain forced him to pause, to catch his breath, to summon the strength for the next vocal assault. Under the blazing South American sun of 1981, 35-year-old Freddie Mercury stood in his hotel room, staring at a leg that would not bear his weight. The fracture had happened so suddenly, so unexpectedly, that even now the reality seemed impossible to accept. In just hours, 20,000 fans would gather at the stadium, their voices already echoing through the streets of the city, their anticipation electric and undeniable. The local doctor had been clear in his assessment. Perform tonight and risk permanent damage. The promoter had made frantic phone calls, calculating losses and searching for alternatives. Cancel the show, they said. Postpone until you heal, they urged. But Freddie Mercury had never been a man to accept the word impossible, and tonight would prove no different. The pain shot through his body like lightning with every movement, yet something deeper than physical discomfort drove his decision. These fans had waited months for this moment. They had saved money they could barely afford, traveled distances that stretched their resources thin, all for the chance to witness Queen perform live. The thought of disappointing them felt more unbearable than any fracture could ever be. As he carefully tested his weight on the injured leg, Freddie made a choice that would define not just this evening, but the very essence of what it meant to be a true performer. He would take the stage tonight, broken leg and all, and he would give these people the show of their lives. The medical team offered painkillers strong enough to numb the agony that pulsed through his lower body, but Freddie refused each injection, each pill, each offer of pharmaceutical relief. His voice was his instrument, more precious than any limb, and he would not risk clouding its clarity with medication. Better to endure the full force of pain than to compromise the one gift that connected him most directly to his audience. The irony was not lost on him, protecting his voice by sacrificing his body, ensuring his art remained pure while his physical form suffered in silence. As evening approached, the energy around the venue became palpable. Fans streamed toward the stadium wearing Queen t-shirts, carrying homemade banners, their excitement building with each passing hour. Inside the venue, roadies made final adjustments to equipment while band members ran through last-minute preparations. Only a select few knew about Freddie's condition, sworn to secrecy about the drama unfolding behind the scenes. The show must appear seamless, effortless, as if nothing in the world could prevent Queen from delivering their legendary performance. Backstage, Freddie developed a strategy born of necessity and determination. he would rely more heavily on his upper body movements, channeling his legendary stage presence through gestures and expressions rather than his typical running and leaping across the stage. The microphone stand would become not just a prop but a subtle support, helping him maintain balance without revealing his limitation to the audience. Every movement would be calculated, every step deliberate, transforming constraint into a different kind of artistry. The moment arrived with the thunderous roar of 20,000 voices calling his name. As Queen took the stage, the pain in Freddie's leg seemed almost secondary to the electric connection he felt with the crowd. The opening chords of their first song rang out, and something magical happened. The adrenaline of performance, the pure joy of creating music with his bandmates, the overwhelming love radiating from the audience. All of it combined to create a natural anesthetic more powerful than any drug the doctors had offered. Song after song, Freddie commanded the stage with an intensity that seemed to transcend physical limitation. His voice soared through the warm South American air, reaching notes that seemed to touch the stars themselves. The audience responded with an energy that felt almost supernatural, their voices joining his in perfect harmony, their bodies moving as one vast organism of rhythm and joy. For those magical hours, the pain became background noise to the symphony of connection between artist and audience. Brian May's guitar wailed its familiar melodies, while Roger Taylor's drums provided the thunderous heartbeat that drove each song forward. John Deacon's bass lines created the foundation upon which their musical cathedral was built. But it was Freddie's presence, his ability to make 20,000 people feel like intimate friends gathered in his living room, that transformed a simple concert into something approaching the divine. His broken leg remained his secret, known only to him and the select few who had witnessed his pre-show struggle. The set list unfolded like a carefully crafted journey through Queen's greatest triumphs. Each song brought new waves of audience participation, voices rising in chorus, hands clapping in perfect synchronization. Freddie fed off this energy, drawing strength from the very people he was determined not to disappoint. When the crowds sang along to their favorite anthems, their collective voice seemed to lift him beyond the limitations of his injured body, carrying him on waves of pure musical ecstasy. During the slower songs, Freddie found moments of respite, using the emotional intimacy of ballads to connect with his audience in ways that required less physical movement. His voice during these quieter moments possessed an almost ethereal quality, as if the pain he was enduring had stripped away all artifice, leaving only the purest expression of human emotion. The audience sensed something special in these moments, though they could never have guessed the true source of the raw vulnerability in his performance. As the show progressed, those few backstage who knew his secret watched in amazement. Rather than diminishing his performance, the challenge seemed to elevate it to new heights. Freddie had always been known for his ability to overcome obstacles, but tonight he was redefining what that meant. He was proving that true artistry could not be broken by mere physical limitation, that the connection between performer and audience transcended any bodily constraint. The encore approached with the audience demanding more, their voices creating a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the stadium. Freddie and the band responded with the songs their fans loved most, each note a gift offered in gratitude for the unwavering support and love that had sustained them throughout the evening. The energy reached crescendo after crescendo, with each song seeming to top the last in terms of pure emotional impact. The final song began with the familiar opening that never failed to send shivers through the crowd. As Freddie's voice rose for the last time that evening, 20,000 people sang along, their voices creating a harmony that seemed to encompass all of human experience: joy, sorrow, triumph, hope, love. In that moment, the secret of his broken leg seemed almost irrelevant compared to the magnificent tapestry of human connection that filled the stadium. As the last notes of the encore faded and the crowd roared with approval, Freddie stood center stage, arms raised in triumph. He bowed deeply to the audience, his smile radiant and genuine despite the excruciating pain coursing through his body. The curtain falls, and for a moment, he stands perfectly still, holding on to the last reserves of his strength. But the moment the curtain hit the stage floor, shielding him from the audience's view, Freddie's carefully maintained facade crumbled. The adrenaline that had carried him through nearly 3 hours of performance drained away in seconds, leaving him face to face with the full reality of his injury. His legs gave way and he collapsed, the weight of his sacrifice finally claiming its due. The few who witnessed this private moment would never forget the sight of a man who had given everything for his art, who had literally stood on broken bones rather than break faith with his audience. Medical personnel rushed to his aid, but even as they tended to his injury, Freddie's first concern was for the audience. Had they enjoyed the show? Did they feel the love he had tried to convey? The answers came in the form of continued cheering from beyond the curtain, voices that refused to stop calling his name, appreciation that seemed to go on forever. Only then did he allow himself to fully acknowledge the cost of his decision, the price he had paid for refusing to cancel. The story of that night in South America became legend within Queen's inner circle, though Freddie himself rarely spoke of it. To him, it was simply what any true performer would do. Put the audience first, honor the commitment made, give everything in service of the music and the people who loved it. The broken leg healed as bones do, but the memory of that performance became something eternal, a testament to the power of human determination and the sacred bond between artist and audience. Years later, when people spoke of Freddie Mercury's greatest performances, that night in South America was always mentioned, not because of any technical perfection or innovative staging, but because it represented something pure about the relationship between performer and audience. It was proof that great art comes not from comfort or ease, but from the willingness to sacrifice, to push beyond perceived limitations, to honor the trust placed in you by those who believe in your gift. The lesson of that evening resonates far beyond the world of music. It speaks to anyone who has ever faced a moment of choice between taking the easy path and honoring their commitments. Freddie Mercury could have canceled that show and no one would have blamed him. The injury was real, the risk substantial, the pain undeniable, but he understood something deeper about the nature of commitment, about the responsibility that comes with being someone others. Buenos Aires, November 1981. The roar of 40,000 voices fills the night air at the Estadio Obras Sanitarias. Inside a cramped dressing room beneath the concrete bowels of the venue, Freddie Mercury sits in stunned silence, staring at his left leg. The diagnosis from the hastily summoned doctor is unforgiving, a clean fracture just above the ankle, sustained during an overly ambitious leap during rehearsal that afternoon. The bone had snapped with an audible crack that echoed through the empty stadium, sending roadies scrambling and band members rushing to his aid. The pain radiates through his entire lower body like liquid fire, each pulse synchronized with his racing heartbeat. Outside, the South American crowd grows restless, their chants of "Queen, Queen, Queen" reverberating through the walls. This tour represents months of planning, thousands of miles of travel, and the dreams of fans who have waited years to witness their heroes perform live. The promoter paces frantically, calculating losses and contemplating the impossible task of refunding tickets to a crowd that has traveled from across the continent. Roger Taylor, Brian May, and John Deacon stand in a tight circle around their frontman, their faces etched with concern and disbelief. The tour physician, a middle-aged Argentine doctor with kind eyes and steady hands, delivers his verdict with professional certainty. Complete rest for 6 weeks minimum. No weight-bearing activities, absolutely no performing. The words hang in the air like a death sentence, each syllable crushing the collective spirit of everyone in the room. Freddie's mind races through the implications. Disappointed fans streaming out of venues across South America. Headlines screaming about Queen's failure to deliver. The band's reputation, built on decades of unwavering commitment to their audience, potentially tarnished by this moment of physical vulnerability. His theatrical persona, carefully crafted through years of electrifying performances, threatened by the simple biological reality of fractured bone. The doctor opens his medical bag and produces a syringe filled with powerful pain medication, explaining that the injection will provide hours of relief from the excruciating agony. But Freddie raises his hand, stopping the needle's approach with a firmness that surprises everyone present. His voice, despite the pain coursing through his body, carries the unmistakable authority that has commanded stages across the globe. No painkillers, nothing that might affect his vocal cords or dull his performance instincts. The show will go on. The room erupts in protests. Brian steps forward, his usually gentle demeanor replaced by genuine anger at what he perceives as dangerous stubbornness. Roger throws his drumsticks against the wall in frustration. John, typically the quiet voice of reason, argues that no performance is worth permanent injury. The promoter pleads with economic desperation, torn between admiration for Freddie's dedication and terror at the potential consequences of allowing an injured performer on stage. But Freddie's decision crystallizes with the absolute certainty that has defined his artistic career. He instructs the crew to fashion a makeshift support system using medical tape and strategic bracing to stabilize the fracture without impeding his movement. The wardrobe team scrambles to adjust his stage costume, ensuring that the injury remains completely invisible to the audience. Makeup artists work frantically to conceal the pallor that pain has brought to his complexion, restoring the vibrant glow that audiences expect from their larger-than-life performer. As showtime approaches, Freddie undergoes a transformation that borders on the supernatural. The agony that had left him doubled over in the dressing room seems to evaporate as he channels every ounce of his theatrical training and professional discipline. Years of ballet lessons in his youth have taught him to ignore physical discomfort for the sake of artistic expression. Decades of live performance have conditioned him to push beyond normal human limitations when the spotlight calls. The moment arrives, house lights dim, the crowd's anticipation reaches fever pitch. Freddie Mercury, fractured leg carefully concealed beneath his iconic white outfit, strides onto the stage with the confidence of a man who owns the very air he breathes. The pain, still present but mentally compartmentalized, becomes just another element to master in his performance arsenal. His voice soars through the opening notes of the first song, each lyric delivered with the full power and emotional range that has made him legendary. For the next 2 hours, 40,000 people witness what they believe to be a typical Queen performance, never suspecting that their idol is dancing on broken bone. Freddie leaps, spins, and commands the stage with his usual theatrical flair, each movement carefully calculated to hide his injury while maintaining the illusion of effortless grace. His bandmates, initially terrified by his decision, find themselves swept up in admiration as they witness an act of artistic heroism that defies conventional understanding. The performance reaches its crescendo during the final song. Freddie's voice cuts through the humid Buenos Aires night like a blade of pure sound, carrying the hopes and dreams of every person in the stadium. The crowd responds with a fervor that transcends mere entertainment, becoming a communal experience of shared ecstasy. For these precious moments, the pain in his leg fades to insignificance compared to the euphoria of perfect artistic communion between performer and audience. As the final notes ring out across the stadium, Freddie takes his bow with characteristic theatrical grandeur. The crowd erupts in appreciation that seems to shake the very foundations of the venue. He waves, blows kisses, and soaks in the adulation with the satisfaction of knowing that he has delivered exactly what his audience deserved. No compromise, no excuses, just the pure, undiluted essence of Queen's musical magic. But the moment he disappears behind the stage curtain, the carefully maintained facade crumbles completely. The adrenaline that had sustained him through 2 hours of athletic performance evaporates instantly, leaving nothing but raw, overwhelming agony. His legs, the injured one now screaming in protest after hours of abuse, simply refused to support his weight any longer. Freddie Mercury, the man who had just commanded 40,000 people with the sheer force of his presence, collapses entirely. The carefully constructed support system around his fracture gives way under the accumulated stress of the performance, sending fresh waves of pain through his entire body. Roadies and band members rush to catch him as he falls, their faces reflecting a mixture of concern, admiration, and disbelief at what they have just witnessed. The backstage area transforms into organized chaos as the medical team springs into action. The same doctor who had been overruled hours earlier now works with urgent efficiency, his professional demeanor masking what might be grudging respect for the injured performer's determination. Ice packs are applied. Emergency pain medication, previously refused, is finally accepted as Freddie acknowledges that the performance is complete and his body can no longer be denied proper treatment. As he is carefully lifted onto a makeshift stretcher, Freddie manages a weak but unmistakably satisfied smile. Through gritted teeth and despite the overwhelming physical distress, he asks only one question of his concerned bandmates. Was the performance perfect? The unanimous answer brings a look of pure contentment to his pain-etched features. The audience never knew. The show was flawless. The music was delivered exactly as intended. In his mind, every moment of agony has been justified by that singular achievement. Roger, Brian, and John stand around their injured frontman with expressions that blend worry for his physical condition with profound respect for his artistic integrity. They have witnessed something beyond mere showmanship or professional dedication. They have seen an artist transcend the limitations of human frailty through pure force of will, transforming personal suffering into collective joy for thousands of people who will remember this night for the rest of their lives. The medical room becomes a sanctuary where Freddie can finally allow his guard to drop completely. Proper pain medication courses through his system, bringing blessed relief from the hours of self-imposed torture. But even as his body begins to relax, his mind continues to replay moments from the performance, analyzing each song, each interaction with the crowd, each gesture and movement for areas of potential improvement. The promoter, initially terrified by the potential liability of allowing an injured performer on stage, now speaks in hushed, reverent tones about what he has witnessed. Word spreads quickly through the venue's backstage area about Freddie's condition and his remarkable decision to perform despite medical advice. Roadies, sound engineers, and venue staff, who have worked with countless artists over the years, shake their heads in amazement at this display of artistic heroism. As the immediate medical crisis subsides and proper treatment begins, the full magnitude of what has occurred starts to sink in for everyone involved. This was not simply a matter of professional obligation or contractual commitment. This was a demonstration of artistic philosophy made manifest through physical sacrifice. Freddie Mercury had chosen to endure personal agony rather than disappoint his audience, embodying the very essence of what it means to be a true performer. The story of this night will become legend among Queen's inner circle, whispered with reverence whenever discussions turn to the extraordinary lengths to which Freddie would go for his art. But for now, in this cramped medical room beneath a Buenos Aires stadium, surrounded by concerned friends and colleagues, Freddie Mercury rests with the quiet satisfaction